Have you heard of synesthesia? It's when people's senses get mixed up somehow, and for example, they might associate different colours with different numbers, or different flavours with different words. Is that a bad thing? Or could it possibly be useful? That's what we're going to be exploring in this episode of Chi Life. So this video is really a bit of a follow-up to the last one, the last Chi Life vlog, where I talked about visualization, imagination, and how this works into creating a good, strong, true mind-body connection, where we want to move beyond visualization and imagination to really connecting with what is happening in our body and directing it and so on. Now, as part of that, we sometimes cross between senses. We sometimes use one sense to represent what might be happening actually in something that we might sense a different way. Now, people with true synesthesia, my impression is, from what I know of it, it doesn't really seem to give them too much trouble, most of them. In some ways maybe it really enriches their lives, seeing things in different ways. A few interesting quirks, like maybe they really hate to say a certain word because it tastes so bad to them, or things like that. But this is a practical skill that we can use consciously in a productive and useful way, and is really the only way that we have to be able to fully comprehend some things. Is we need to be able to do this, as opposed to sort of unconsciously or involuntarily making that switch over, which is true synesthesia. So within Qigong, for example, this is how we can develop a kind of inner sight, as it were. So, for example, if you are working with your organs inside your body, now assuming that you're not going to cut yourself open and physically look at them, assuming you're not getting yourself into any medical imaging equipment, x-rays or CAT scans or MRIs or anything like that, but working with your own awareness, you can discover a lot of what's happening inside you. And a lot of this is going to be, it's through, turning your attention to it and feeling what's happening. But how do you interpret what you feel is happening in there? In order to get more detail, it's likely that you might create a visual image of it, that even though you can't physically see it, from what you sense in your mind to interpret it, you create a visual image of it. And that visual image might include areas that are dark, or areas that are bright, or areas that have different colors and so on. And we use this to understand and interpret what it is that we're sensing. We also use this in many other areas of Qigong. So, for example, a good example of this is within some meditations. You may use color, and if you're just there and physically looking, it doesn't mean that you're suddenly going to see physically this color, but you induce the energy of that color, and in your mind's eye you either see or do not see the color. Now, different colors associate with different energy states within the body and different functions of the body. And so how easily you can or cannot see a particular color will relate to how strong that type of energy or those physical functions inside your body are. And so if you're resistant to being able to visualize a particular color, it will indicate that there's some resistance to your body functioning in a certain way. And if you see it easily, the opposite. So this is very useful. Sometimes people have a hard time with that to begin with, because they're working with color and they're expecting to physically see it. But it's about, in your internal map, can you see it? This idea of mapping is very useful, because this is another time where we use this a lot. I mean, just as a very arbitrary example of this idea, say for example, if we want to map the land, that's one thing. we're going to draw as best we can things to represent the land, which isn't exactly going to be it, but visually we can maybe correlate that to the land. But what if it was something like, say you wanted to map income distribution in an area? I mean, income, financial stuff, that's like really abstract as it is in many ways, and then you want to map that to understand it. Well, you might choose to represent different levels of income with different colors, and then draw those colors on the map to show areas of high income and low income, and this would help you to understand this quite abstract concept very quickly using that sense. Now that's the visual senses. We use this all the time, and income distribution, that's just one thing I just picked randomly. It could be any number of things that we use in mapping this way. This applies to other senses as well. It's not just that, where we can use one sense to represent other things. One of the questions that I've had recently, or a few people have commented about this idea of visualization and imagination versus what's actually real since I posted the last video. And one of them was in the Qigong Everyday group. She mentioned that when she does some Qigong exercises where you focus on the flow and on waves of energy, that she hears a sound of waves sloshing and splashing. And is it likely that she's physically hearing that sound? Probably not, unless she's got some water stuck in her ear, or conceivably there can be a physical sound related to changes in blood pressure as part of that. But more likely it's just an association she's created inside herself. And is that a bad thing? No, it's probably very useful to her, because that association can be due to changes in fluid pressure and so on within her body, not necessarily a physical sound, but by associating that sound with it, she's tuning into and understanding things happening within her body more easily, more effectively. So this can work in both directions. We can either use another sense to represent what we sense happening, right? And so we're perceiving what's happening and represent it to ourselves using sight, sound, so on, as a way for us to understand it. Or it can work the other way, and this is used a lot, where we use an image or a sense of whatever it is, and we use that to then create something within ourselves, a change in our energy state, our energy movement, and so on. And we do this in Qigong all the time. Of course, we use like the imagery of waves to get smooth movement through our body. Now we do create a physical wave as part of that as well, but the imagery helps us to do it more effectively. We might use the imagery, for example, of trees. I'm surrounded by trees right now, to create a certain sense and movement of the energy inside us as well. One of the ones you might be familiar with is, the idea of rooting down into the ground. But there's other things to do with the rising energy through the body, like the rising of sap through the tree, and so on. And so all of this is very useful. Now, if we can make strong association between our senses, it can help us to be more effective at working with our energy. The only thing we need to avoid is not being able to distinguish between what's physically occurring and what is just a representation of something else that is occurring inside us. And if we do that, the more the better. We're going to have a stronger ability to understand what we perceive and work with it. So anyway, hopefully that's something that might be interesting to you. It might be helpful to you. If maybe a bit of a rambly one this time. Some of them will be more short and to the point, these videos, and some of them might end up talking a bit more in depth or a bit more rambly. But if you've enjoyed this video, and I do hope to grow the channel so that more people, reach more people, help them along their Qigong path. Maybe you could like, comment, subscribe, share with someone else who this might be useful to as well. Anyway, I look forward to seeing you on the next one.